Good morning, everyone. We live in intriguing times. We are hyper-connected, at the same time increasingly disconnected from each other. When we drive, we seek guidance from above, but in our life's journey, probably we don't quite get the time to seek as much guidance. So we had the privilege of listening to His Holiness till now. We now have an eminent panel of people here who bring very strong perspectives from the business world. So it truly should be an enlightening discussion today where we'll not only have those perspectives, but hopefully a strong interaction from the audience as well as amongst the panel members together with Swamiji here. Swamiji talked about nature inherently is not egalitarian, and of course increasingly in the society we have inequality which is increasing and with its manifest problems and so on. So I'd like to start with Gautam and ask him to share his perspectives, and more so he's increasingly getting into the world of social enterprises and so on. So Gautam, why don't you start?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to thank Rajiv for inviting me here. It's wonderful to listen to you this Saturday morning. I think it's a very worthwhile way to spend the start of the weekend. I think I should just spend 2 minutes giving an introduction as to why I'm here. I mean, of course, we all want to be here, but my connection with Rajiv goes back to brings me to my school days, because his uncle Rishikesh Mohammedlal and Ajay Piramal, who you also saw on the board, and me are connected. The fact that we started off at school together when we were 11 years old. So so all these now 5 decades later, we still remain good friends and connected in different ways. We're talking about sustainability. That's in this world, even though I moved to Singapore when I was 16, it's an amazing example of remaining connected, even though our lives and our work has taken us different ways and different paths. But I'm glad that that connection brought me here this morning. I think before we came over here this morning, I think we've been trying to say what the 3 panelists are going to say, and we wanted to leave it fairly unstructured. And I thought of saying a few things. But after listening to His Holiness, I want to tweak it a little bit, so I might confuse my fellow panelists, but I think I'll stick to my main themes. But we talked about sustainable capitalism and other isms. And for all of us here in Singapore, this last 5 weeks has been very emotional because of the passing away of our founding father, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. It's also got us to reflect and look at what this country has achieved. And of course, Mr. Khattar has been here since many years, 1949, but I came here in 1971, the 6 years after Singapore became independent, and also seen this progress. And it's an amazing progress I think probably not equaled anywhere else in the world, from what it started with very little resources and how it was achieved. And it's so I was trying to say, what sort of capitalism is that? And I mean, what sort of capitalism that we follow here in Singapore? And Mr. Lee Kuan Yew has always been referred to as a pragmatic person. So is it pragmatic capitalism that brought Singapore to where it is? Because it is a combination of many aspects of capitalism. That Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was not a particularly ideological or even a spiritual person, but he was very practical. He took the best of many things and brought Singapore to where it is. But it's a small place, and many of the challenges he faced perhaps difficult to achieve elsewhere. But some of the values of having an incorruptible civil service, an impartial judiciary, and impartial bureaucracy, and a meritocracy, these 3 things together with following a very capitalistic way generally. And actually that's one difference in his approach which led him away from India initially, because he was a great fan of Gandhi and Nehru initially, because of the fact that they stood up to anti-colonialists, wanted to become independent. He was a great fan of India initially, but then India went a very socialistic way, and he said, well, that's not the way I want to go, because unless you create value and you create wealth, how will you lift your people? A little bit what Mr. Modi is trying to do now. Ultimately, if you want to uplift people from poverty, you need to create wealth. And capitalism is obviously one way of doing it. Even China is, to some extent now, moving that way. Most countries are doing it. But we all know, we all appreciate unbridled capitalism gets you to all sorts of problems. So I just wanted to leave three things which, for our further discussion. We talked about inequality, and Moderator said that the world is really unequal in every way, and very difficult to bring equality in and spread it consistently across. But inequality is just, the scourge of inequality is amazing now, in the sense that even in our lifetime, the way it is not just the rich, the middle class, and the lower incomes. It's the fact that people are becoming just super rich at the top, and and they're creating this wealth with very few people. And that has huge implications for the world, because you don't need to employ as many people. And then, and this has been done because of technology, because of globalization, and because of convergence, through excellent communication, the internet, the whole fact that the world has shrunk. And this inequality is only going to get more and more unless we do something about it. Because once you don't need to employ and hire people to do the things that create wealth, that's going to be an issue. The other thing is demographic trends are also very worrying, in the sense that people are living longer, and the fact that people living longer, how do we take care of them, especially if they have also not worked for large parts of their life, because that's what is happening. Unemployment is becoming systemic in even places like Europe. How do you then look after these people? So these two items are big issues that the world has to face. And within all of this, how do you give equality of opportunity to people? So I think some of the things that resonated with me, which I listened to His Holiness, this trusteeship concept is a very, very important concept. I mean, if people realize that they're only here for a very short period of time, and that they need to leave this place better than what it was when they came in, that will be a long way towards trying to get this whole thing of capitalism, put it in its context. And you do this by somehow putting this in the DNA of companies. And I've seen, we saw Ajay Piramal out there talking to people in these sort of forums. In his own company, he's trying to get this into the DNA of his company by having his core values of action, care, and knowledge. These are his three core values: knowledge, action, and care, built into the DNA of every employee. And that way, saying that it's not only about making profits, it's about, obviously you need knowledge, you need empowerment, you need innovation, you need entrepreneurship, but it's care and trusteeship. Trusteeship is built into those values, which hopefully not only makes better business sense, but also makes more sustainable capitalism.
Thanks, Gautam. I was Googling some things around spirituality and capitalism, and I came across some interesting things. It turns out that there is actually a new breed of people who call themselves spiritual capitalism consultants. Fair number of them, I think they seem to be doing good work, but spirituality itself is becoming business as well, as I'm sure we all we know of those examples and so on. But anyway, that takes me to the concept of capitalism and the limits to it. And Dane, you come from the land of capitalism, or you grew up in the land of capitalism, so would like to hear your perspectives on that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. And thank you, Your Holiness, for your comments. I was very impressed and inspired with the messages that you sent and the clarity with which you delivered it. As was mentioned, I grew up in the U.S., and I moved to Asia about 21 years ago. I moved to Hong Kong, and I've been in Singapore for 18 years. And when I grew up, I suppose you could say I grew up in a world of black and white, and I don't mean in terms of the ethnicity of people, I mean in terms of the clarity of idea, in the sense that it was very clear, and I was very idealistic about how things were and how they should be. Of course, in school, I learned about the spectrum that was discussed earlier today. And at home, growing up in the US, I suppose my guiding lights of how I thought and how I lived my life were Christianity, democracy, and capitalism. And they were all kind of blended into a mix. And as I've lived my life out here and had my experience, I've seen that there is no black and white. There are different shades of gray, and that none of those elements that I just mentioned are inherently good or bad. And it's not about rules, and it's not binary. There's something in between. And the reason that I'm here is when it comes to that third pillar of capitalism, I've been seeing more and more, and I'm an analyst professionally, I've been seeing problems and challenges that are concerning to me. And I'm questioning capitalism more than I have ever before. Because I see this massive disparity between super rich and everybody else. And that gap is changing and growing exponentially in a very, very troubling way. I saw a stat, I don't know if it's true, that the 80 wealthiest people in the world have something like 40 or 50% of the world's wealth. I think we can all agree that's not a good thing. So I've been seeing these disparities, and I've also been thinking about where will this system lead? So if you look at, economically speaking, in the West, you had I'll just say over the past 40 years, you had blue-collar jobs be decimated and move to the East. Those blue-collar workers have had to adapt and evolve, and in some cases they could, in some cases they couldn't. In Western Europe right now, you have a big problem, and in the US to an extent, a problem with employment. How do you employ people? You have a lot of very smart kids who are graduating from great universities and they can't find jobs. Places like Spain and Italy and Portugal and in the Middle East, if you look at Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states, you have very, very well-educated, rich people, and they're not employed. And as I look at automation and where it's heading, I see an environment where white-collar jobs could be automated out of existence. Google and Johnson & Johnson just signed an agreement to work together on robots to perform surgeries. After the Germanwings tragedy, people were talking about whether or not pilots should have drones. Of course, we already have drones. So if you think about an environment where we're not just automating blue-collar jobs out of existence, we're automating white-collar jobs out of existence, what does that mean? How are we going to employ people? And if you don't have workers, can you have customers? So I see issues, and I think in a lot of, as you said, these Western countries, we see the canary in the coal mine, where the strains of capitalism, I think it needs to change, it needs to evolve. And where my mind went in the discussion today is what is going to be the trigger for that change. A quote that I like is, "A pain is a great teacher." That, and I liked the comment this morning about human nature fought back. So if you look at what is going to be the trigger for that change to capitalism that we're seeking today, is it going to be from the inside and as it should be? Or is it going to be because it's a necessity and it has to be? And I'm afraid it might be the latter. I think that the real spark in the long term could be necessity, because the capitalistic system starts to break down in the same way that the communist system did as well. But anyway, hopefully not. Hopefully through sessions like this and these discussions, we can indeed have a grassroots improvement. Well, one other connection I thought of this morning was the sharing economy. And when we talk about trusteeship. So with one of the trends, economically speaking, is the so-called sharing economy, where through Uber or through Airbnb or companies like this, it's more about getting access to that asset rather than owning it. You don't need to own that vacation house. You can use it through Airbnb. You don't need to own the car. You can get a ride through this app. So I think, so from that perspective, it's more hopeful than perhaps my earlier comments. But either way, I'm happy to be here, happy to share thoughts with all of you and to learn from all of you as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dane. At the beginning of the session today, Rajiv took us through the objectives of Artha Forum, and he talked about encouraging entrepreneurs to imbibe values and social conscience and those kind of things. So we have an example here. Jayesh, you are a serial entrepreneur, and folks, that seriously serial entrepreneur, 9 startups, okay, so it's not 2 or 3 that makes serial, it is 9. So you've been a serial entrepreneur and now into impact investing as well. So I'd like you to share your perspectives, and perhaps you could, after that, might want to pose a question to Swamiji.
Thank you very much. I grapple with some pragmatic questions myself, so what I'm going to do is pose those questions to all of you and request all of you to think about these things. And these questions probably came to your mind as well. One of the big questions that all of us grapple with is how much is enough? There are people who are affluent, and there are people who are in the professional world, there are businessmen here, there are entrepreneurs. Well, how much is enough? Are we all just mindlessly accumulating wealth, or is there a planned accumulation of wealth? Is there a plan behind this? I have a lot of friends who are entrepreneurs who exit and get huge sums of money. So they make money, they spend half their life making their money. And then they spend the rest of their lives making money on money. And then they die. And the question is, do we plan to arrive somewhere before we die, or this is just a mindless accumulation? I think we have to think about the measure of success and happiness. I think we all think, some of us think that maybe the measure of how much money, wealth we have is the measure of our success. Then once we have gone past that, then we start doing good. So a lot of people start doing good, and then they start measuring how much they're doing. But what about being good, right? Is there a calibration of that being good? So that's a question I have. One very interesting book, in case you guys haven't read, which has really influenced me, is How Will You Measure Your Life? It's written by Clayton Christensen. It makes you think about your life and the purpose of your life. And I encourage folks to read it. So one of the things people do is when they see some affluent folks, especially sitting on a panel, they always look at it with a lens saying, okay, this guy's made it. He's made a lot of money, so he's sitting there and giving us gyan. Actually, it's a lot more than that, because there will always be someone who's more affluent than the other person, or you, or me. So at what point do you sit back and take a view of what is enough, how much is enough? The other thing that I talk about is that how much is enough is also partly need-based. I think His Holiness talked about that. Or is it want-based? Sometimes it's insecurity-based, right? We're insecure. So I have a friend who's got a house completely paid off. He's got $5 million in the bank, and he's still going at it because he doesn't think it's enough. And then there are many people in Singapore who live in Singapore. They may think that, yes, actually it is not enough. And then there are others who are having professional jobs who think, oh my God, this guy's got so much, why does he have to keep going? So is it insecurity based, or is it lifestyle based? This guy's got amazing amounts of lifestyle. And then last but not least, and this is or, is it bragging rights, right? There are folks who have just amazing lifestyles and they don't think they have enough. They want bragging rights, they want to buy teams, they want to fly around, they want to own private jets. And it's still not enough, they still keep going at it. So do we, or should we plan, right, to arrive? The other thing that many of us might have read is about what makes us happy. There's research that is being done. And there's a lot of discussion about material spending versus experiential spending, right? So you can pose that question, right? I mean, is material spending bringing so much happiness? And then, of course, if you pose that question to the fair ladies in this audience, who say, well, would you rather have a solitaire or would you like to go on vacation to Switzerland? Well, very likely the smart ladies will say we want both and cheap. So my final comments is about giving, right? So all of us, in whatever accumulation of wealth we do, and after we go through all of that, there is this giving back in all of our minds, right? We live in a charmed life here in Singapore, and to whatever extent, whether you give $50 a month or $50 a year, or there are people who are giving away much larger sums of money. I personally I've discovered over time that there's an allocation of giving, and giving back to the community is in three parts. One is giving away, which is in terms of grant, what we call grants, which is you give away the money, good happens, and then they come back again, and you keep giving, right? So it's a one-sided, it's grant, charity. The second is loaning. So there are a lot of people doing micro loans. So you give a loan, some good happens, and the money comes back to you, and then you can cycle it over and over again. So that's another model. And the third model that I've discovered is impact investing. And impact investing is where you invest in equity of companies that are doing good. So it's for profit, doing good. And there are a lot of examples of that. There are a lot of funds, and this is the new hybrid. There are a lot of people like Acumen Fund, and there is Obedia Networks. Right? These are doing both the grant model as well as the impact investing model. And then there are angel impact networks which get together and they do it. And again, I just leave you with this thought to say that, okay, there's an accumulation of wealth and then there is giving away, but neither of them should be mindless. You should really think through that as much as you can. So that's my comments. And then to pose this first question, I'm always grappling with this issue of religion. As I see religion developing over my lifetime, and I'm a lot older than what I look, and as I see that religion, the conventional religion is slowly fading, I feel, and there is a lot more of spiritualism that's coming in, and there are more and more youngsters who are becoming agnostic. I mean, if you go to their Facebook and you see religion, it says agnostic, and so I think it's going from conventional religion, cult, to spiritualism, to agnostic. And I worry about the morality, of the world as a result of it. So I guess my question is, while you mentioned that religion and spirituality is one, I mean, I see more and more people sort of shying away from conventional religion these days. So can you just make some comments about that, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I mentioned in the lecture, essentially it is because having burnt our fingers, we are very cautious. We have seen the ill effects of religion being practiced wrongly, and therefore we ascribe the fault to the religion rather than to the practitioners of the religion. So I think as I mentioned, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Rather, we make some systemic changes. We try to understand what real religion is about. And I define spirituality as the essence of religion, that gives that religion meaning, purpose, philosophy, that brings people to a higher level than just a bodily designation of me being such and such a faith and somebody else being of such and such a faith. So when you practice your religion with that spiritual understanding, then you actually transcend the distinctions that arise between different religions. So if we have this broad understanding, then I think young people today will also take to the path of genuine religion. We don't blame them because that's what they're seeing in the world around them. So they come to this conclusion, they want answers. And perhaps another issue is that there isn't sufficient spiritual education. By spiritual education, I don't mean just religious education. That's part of it, but something deeper and higher. Then perhaps we would have a solution. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Dane, your turn to ask the question.
Yes. So are you are you optimistic that this transition will take place, the transition to the environment that you described? How optimistic are you, and what do you think the trigger will be to make this happen, or how quickly will it happen if you think it will?
Hope lies eternal in the human breast. So I'm hopeful. And I feel more hopeful when I see gatherings like this. This is a gathering of leaders of society, people coming in from different walks of life. And if the leaders, by leaders I don't mean only the political leaders, I mean leaders in every walk of life, if they realize the importance of this and they set the standards, then yes, definitely there is so much hope. So essentially the intellectuals in the society and the doers and achievers in society, if they take up to spirituality in a substantial way, and they, through their lives and through their words, disseminate this in the world, then I think it is definitely a possibility that is very real.
Thank you. Before I invite Gautam to pose his question, so soon I'll be opening it up to questions to the audience, so please start thinking of the questions you want to ask, and Satpal, you too, after Gautam, in case you want to ask the question. So more so, you can see that the panel doesn't have any women in this. It's pretty obvious, we don't have. So I hope the women in the audience will make up in terms of the proportion of the questions that come and restore the balance somewhat. So Gautam, over to you for your question.
I think what Swamiji said, there's so much truth in what he said about the fact that we need to be more need-based rather than greed-based, and this trusteeship thing. These are like many other things, like we talked about diversity. We all know we need more women on company boards, but this doesn't happen. So, all the the things which are really very vital for success, we all seem to know, that these are good things to do. And there was a question of how do we get there before we are forced, in a very, because of some catastrophe that we hopefully want to avoid. How do we get, whether it is organizations, countries, because I think having rule-based ways of forcing people doesn't seem to work. Sometimes it may just start the process. When in India, for example, now every company has to set aside a certain percentage for CSR, but is that the way to go, or how do we get this thing into people's DNA?
Thank you. I'll use an Americanese. Talk it up. We just have to talk about it. Talk, and talk at various fora. And this is the process of education. Just as we have education in mathematics, physics, accounting, we also have to have awareness education, spiritual awareness education. When we speak about this, when we have more and more seminars and discussions and workshops and lectures and personal discussions, articles, books coming out, and gradually we're going to see a transformation. It's not about to happen overnight. But because education doesn't happen overnight. But this is the way to move. We have to educate people, and we have to make that transformation substantial and internal. Whilst I don't have any quarrel with the external legislative framework that is necessary. But through education, we can bring about a very substantial internal change.
Thank you. Satpal?
No, I'll wait for the question from the floor.
Sure. Okay, so now it's open to questions. So, and you're free to address your questions to His Holiness or to any other panel members. So quite a few. So there's a lady out there. So we'll start there. So, okay.
This hall could accommodate only 4 mics.
Okay, go ahead.
First of all, Your Holiness, thank you so much for an inspiring talk. After a long time, I've heard somebody talk about spirituality and capitalism with such clarity, so thank you very much. My question is, we talked about systemic changes, and then there was this thing about women on board. So I'll challenge the gentleman on stage, what are you doing to support our cause? And Your Holiness, how can we bring about the systemic changes you're talking about in religious communities?
We'll start with His Holiness first.
Systemic changes, as I mentioned in reference to the earlier question, is through education, fundamentally. We may have revolutionary, drastic changes coming about sometimes, and that may also be needed in as much as surgery is sometimes needed. But if you can do with medical help rather than surgical help, it's always better. So therefore, education is the key. Education, not in a forced manner, but we have to appeal to the higher intelligence of people. We have to present things in a logical, rational manner and leave it to the good judgment of people to accept. And people are looking for something higher, so they will accept it when they find it reasonable. So that is the method by which we have to transform the world.
Thank you. I think the question was directed at the panel as well, so instead of asking everybody in the panel to answer, maybe I can ask Gautam to take it in terms of... whether it's a privilege or a moderator, so I asked you, so I'll ask... okay, Satpal, you go.
I mean, you have the answer from Puja Swamiji. One will never disagree with him. He's spiritually reached. In terms of everyday life, it's not so simple. As you said, you can talk about it, you can talk to your children about it. We face this problem every day. I go back with my son every day, and we always disagree at times about this thing. He says he believes in a God, but doesn't believe in the religion, a religion as such. I think that's nonsense, but he's my son, so he probably... I think the problem that we have in today's world is not a lack of knowledge, but too much knowledge through the internet. They are exposed to everything. Of course, they don't read everything, they don't even read newspapers, but they read their Facebook, they read the internet, they can access a huge amount of this thing. But it's a persistent battle to try and bring them to your level of thinking, which may not be even your own level of thinking, just an independent mindset to try and see the good values and distinguish between those good values and what is obviously the rubbish that you see on the internet. I think persistence will pay. As Swamiji says, you just talk and talk about it. As they grow older, the children will see it, and